Hey! Hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron, and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. So, EA's Star Wars Battlefront 2. DICE's Star Wars Battlefront 2, the game that in 2017 set the world on fire. We are halfway through the year 2019 now, and guess what? Battlefront 2 is still getting content updates, patches, fixes, and changes, with even more coming in the near future. Battlefront 2 is in a better state, not only when compared to itself at launch in 2017, but it is also in a better state when compared to its video game contemporaries and competitors. Isn't that just wild? The majority assumed, and rightfully so, that the DICE Battlefront team, and of course the publisher Electronic Arts, would abandon this game a few months after launch, cut their losses and run, and could you blame them? After the pay-to-win loot box controversy, the game's reputation was beyond toxic. So I could completely understand if they just abandoned the game. It would suck, but I could understand it. But that's not what they did. For the past almost 2 years now, they have been updating the game, adding new content, new hero characters, new playable characters, new game modes, a better progression system, cosmetics that are actually worth unlocking and playing for. On top of all that, a huge variety of changes and fixes and additions to the game's overall mechanics and balancing, all of which were implemented based on community feedback. I have to commend the DICE Battlefront team. They're really doing a great job. And they're making their colleagues over at the DICE Battlefield team look wholly incompetent by comparison. I mean, to put it bluntly, Battlefield 5 is still kind of a dumpster fire. From what I've heard from people who still play the game, it's still packed to the brim with technical issues. Technical issues that were in the previous Battlefield games but were fixed. The game is also lighter on content when compared to the previous Battlefields. Seriously, compare the post-launch support from Battlefield to Battlefront. It's night and day. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is in a state where I can easily recommend the game without hesitation. It's packed to the brim with content, varying gameplay experiences with all the different playable classes and characters, and of course with the spaceship combat and vehicles in general too. There's a decent amount of content available for those of you who prefer to play solo, with a serviceable single-player campaign, as well as some options and scenarios to play around in arcade mode. But of course the real meat of the game comes from its PvP multiplayer, which really is a one-of-a-kind experience. There are very few PvP multiplayer games that match the scale and visual spectacle of Star Wars Battlefront 2. And on top of all that, it's still getting post-launch content, and the devs are still listening to and implementing community feedback, fixing issues and making changes tailored to the community wants. I mean, just recently we got a whole new unit class, the Droidicas, from the prequels. I was convinced that this was never going to happen, that they'd never be in the game, but here they are! Almost 2 years later, and Star Wars Battlefront 2 and the DICE Battlefront team are still providing reasons to keep playing the game and providing new gameplay experiences within the game. It's also kind of heartwarming seeing as how they've legitimately taken criticism to heart. Like for example, when the new Clone Trooper skins were added into the game, I criticized them along with many others, that these were pretty shitty skins, just basic recolors. That the modding community for the game, and yes, Star Wars Battlefront 2 does have a very active modding community. I argued at the time that the modding community was creating better skins, better cosmetics for the game than the developers were. Well, they took that criticism to heart, and they redid a lot of the Clone Trooper cosmetics, and added in a bunch of new ones and high-detailed ones, unique models, and now there's a ton of really awesome Clone Trooper skins that are worth unlocking, worth playing for, because they're cool. And I'm sure the Star Wars lore nerds who love the Clone Wars deeply appreciate this kind of fan service, seeing these Clone Trooper battalions finally make an appearance in a video game. Now, up until this point in the video, I've been trying to be bipartisan and objective, not trying to implement too much of my bias and personal opinion into this video, but if I may, personally, I've really been enjoying Star Wars Battlefront 2. I've been playing it since 2017, and it's just been making all the right moves to keep me coming back for more. I find it to be a very fun shooter action game, whether you're playing it in first person or third person, whether you're playing as one of the trooper classes, or as one of the hero characters, or flying around and blasting away in a starfighter. With the Star Wars aesthetic and the Star Wars themes and that classic Star Wars music accompanying everything, and as I myself being a fan of Star Wars, it's just a really enjoyable experience for me. It looks, sounds, feels, and plays like a big budget Star Wars game. It satisfies my craving for epic Star Wars battles, I can't help it. I've really grown to quite enjoy Star Wars Battlefront 2. Is it one of my favorite Star Wars games of all time, however? Nope. My favorite Star Wars games would still have to go to the original Star Wars Battlefront 2, classic Star Wars Battlefront 2, Star Wars Republic Commando, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, oh, and Star Wars The Force Unleashed. But EA and DICE's Star Wars Battlefront 2, I would still argue, is a pretty damn good Star Wars game at this point. I would argue that it's gone through its redemption arc. Now, of course, however, never forgive Electronic Arts, and never forget their intentions with this game's monetization system at launch. But when it comes to the game itself, and when it comes to its developers, the Battlefront team over at DICE, I think it's safe to say at this point that the game itself and its devs have been redeemed. They've done a good job here, they have a good game on their hands, and EA and DICE's Star Wars Battlefront 2 can be added to the haul of pretty good Star Wars games. All of that being said, however, is there still room for improvement? Yes, abso-goddamn-lutely. Arcade mode could use a buff or a rework. I would love to see the game modes Galactic Assault, Capital Supremacy, and Starfighter Assault make their way to arcade mode. You know, for the sake of players who prefer to play games solo or have really shit internet. Also, for of course, historical preservation. I mean, this is an EA game after all, and they have a habit of shutting down multiplayer servers. So having those big battle game modes in arcade would go a long way in terms of historical preservation of gameplay content. I don't know about the rest of you, but I hate buying a multiplayer game, only for it to become unplayable years later, or at least have a portion of it become unplayable, because there was no proper bot support, or PvE, or single player. So yeah, having all of the big battle game modes in arcade, I would love to see that happen. Also, while we're on the topic of arcade mode, I don't know if this is a possibility now. You'd think after all these years they would have done something by now, but DICE, if you can, could we please get an update to the AI? I realize now in my initial Star Wars Battlefront 2 review, I was way too forgiving when it came to the topic of the AI in the game, whether it be in the single-player campaign or arcade mode. After playing just so many other video games, with far superior, far more intelligent AI, I just can't excuse this no more. Sure, the AI enemies are fun to kill as brainless cannon fodder, but that's it. They are exclusively brainless cannon fodder. They aimlessly wander around the maps and shoot you if they see you. Again, unfortunately, I don't think this will ever be changed or improved. It's been almost 2 years. If they could have done something by now, they would have. But for the sake of being fair and balancing the positivity with the negativity, I gotta admit, the AI is pretty bad. And now when it comes to multiplayer, there are specific issues when it comes to balancing, particularly the hero characters and some of their strengths and weaknesses, and certain star cards for certain classes being too weak or too strong. It's a real mix of subjective personal complaints and objective criticisms when it comes to all that. But the DICE Battlefront team, as I mentioned earlier in the video, have been very active with the community and making changes and additions based on feedback. So I have no doubt when it comes to the multiplayer PvP, the major personal gripes are already being worked on. So not too much I can add there really. But what I can say, however, is I am very excited for the future, because like I said earlier, once again, the DICE Battlefront team are still adding new content into the game. Sometime soon, in a month or two, the planet of Felucia from the Clone Wars is going to be added as a new map. We're going to be getting a beautiful alien jungle to blow shit up in. I can't wait. EA and DICE's Star Wars Battlefront 2 has been a fascinating game to follow. From the pay-to-win loot box controversy, to the moral outrage from the gaming community, to the game's slow but steady recovery and redemption, seeing the developers never give up or abandon it, and seeing them now doing a better job at post-launch content, and overall game and community support, making games like Battlefield 5, Overwatch, and Call of Duty look poor by comparison. It's a remarkable journey Star Wars Battlefront 2 has been on. While it certainly isn't one of my favorite games of all time, nor is it one of the best multiplayer games of all time, and while it isn't one of the greatest Star Wars games of all time, for what the game is, for what it's done, now that I believe can certainly be appreciated. Anyways, that has been a video. I hope you liked the video. If you did indeed like the video in any shape or form, please be sure to hit the like button. Hit the like button up too. Helps me, helps everybody involved in the video. If you hit the like button, please leave a comment in the comment section down below. I love reading comments. Getting near enough comments, please leave a comment. If you want to help out and support this video, then please share it on social media, Twitter and Facebook. If you want to help out and support me directly, well, there's always Patreon. Anyways, guys, that's been a video, and I'll see you all later.